All right, hey everyone. Thanks for those of you who stayed. If you are looking for the Xamarin Forms, I suggest you go to Linnaeus now. I'll give you a free pass. I'll hunt you down later. But today I have a confession to make, actually. This is going to be good with my boss sitting in here, too. I like to let other developers make me look good. So who else would like to let other developers make them look good? Yeah, I thought so. I mean, programming is flippin' hard work, right? So usually when I'm trying to find a solution to a problem, I follow a typical format, and that's often, first of all, is there already a solution out there? Preferably free, because I'm also a cheap programmer. If there's not a free solution, can I find one that's economical to either purchase or maybe find someone who is an expert on it that I can pay for their time so I'm not wasting my own time? Now, the nice thing about Xamarin is that we love C#. So even if you can't find a Xamarin-specific solution, you might be able to find a C# solution somewhere and get it working on Xamarin with fairly little effort. So my name is Jonathan Dick, and I'm on the components team. And it's been really interesting this week because I've talked to a lot of people at the conference, and when they've asked what I do with Xamarin, I say, well, I'm on the components team. I get a lot of blank stares. So I'm here today, and that gives me some confidence and inspires me that I want to help you see that by using Xamarin Component Store, you can build your apps faster, you can improve how they look and how they feel and how they perform. Sir Isaac Newton said, "If I have seen farther, it is by standing on the shoulders of giants." And his advice remains relevant today, even to us mobile developers. So how do we follow Sir Isaac's advice? Well, a really good place to start is the over 200 giants that you already have access to in the component store. There's a lot in there. So what's a component? Well, a component is, there can be several types of components. We've got themes to make your app look better. We've got user controls to make your app a more rich experience for your users. And then we've got all sorts of libraries that do pretty much anything else you can think of. What's inside of a component? Well, we like to have videos and screenshots. That way, when you're browsing for a component, you know pretty fast if it's the right one for you or not. We have reusable libraries, of course. That's the whole purpose of the components, after all. We've got documentation. So the documentation is telling you, what does the component do? How do you get it to work? And part of that is our Getting Started guide. So this is really important to us. We like to provide you right away with a quick and easy way to see how to get the component up and running so that you're not downloading this thing and hunting all over the web to figure out how to use it. We also have sample solutions and projects in the component, and that's meant to further help you implement the component in your own app, maybe give it some more context than the Getting Started guide shows, and maybe show you how to do a little bit more than the Getting Started guide. But we keep getting asked this question too. I know I hear it all the time. Well, what about NuGet? We have this thing called NuGet. It's pretty awesome. Why do we have a component store? And to tell you the truth, we actually really love components, or NuGets. We love components too, of course. And this is really evidenced by the fact that we have shipped really good NuGet support now in Xamarin Studio 5. That support keeps getting better and better as we go on. The latest versions of Xamarin Studio have even more features to do with NuGet. And you can even probably see that there's some NuGet packages that we actually ship ourselves on the NuGet gallery. So things like Xamarin Forms, Android support libraries, Google Play services. We have a bunch of components now in the gallery, which is kind of cool. But that doesn't really answer the question of, well, why components instead of NuGets? How do they fit together? Well, we know that they're not really mutually exclusive. NuGets are really good for distributing libraries, reusable bits of code, that kind of thing. But they're not so good at distributing samples and documentation. So components are still really important to us for a few of these reasons. Like I mentioned earlier, the samples and documentation, the Getting Started guide, we really want to provide an excellent user experience when you're looking at components. And part of that process is the curation of them. So whenever you submit a new component or someone submits a new component or a new version of the component, we actually have someone manually go through and verify each of those submissions. So they're checking for things to make sure like the sample projects run, the getting started guides make sense. Basically, we want to inspire confidence from you as a developer that when you're going out to our component store, you're looking at something that's of a premium quality and you're able to depend on it. We also do paid components. So if you're a component author, we give you the ability to sell your component on our store. It's much like an app store, like the Apple App Store, where we handle all of the transaction processing for you. We deal with all of that part of it, and at the end of the month, we send you some money for the components you sold. So these are some pretty good reasons why we keep using the component store, why we've built the component store, and how the two sort of fit together. Not on this slide, we're also now able to add NuGet dependencies in our components. So we're starting to meld the worlds of components and NuGets together. So I've talked a little bit about what components are, what the component store is. Now I'd like to bring you through meeting some of those giants. And we'll start out by the first one that we announced on Wednesday in the keynote, which is Sync Fusion Essential Studio. So this one's really cool. It's actually, I believe it's our first Xamarin Forms component. So it's a visual component that you can actually write shared code across all of your applications for to do data visualizations. So you can get charts, gauges, tree maps, basically anything you would expect out of this type of library. But you can also do document viewing and creation. You're able to make Word and Excel documents as well as PDFs as well. And again, this is all done on your shared code layer in Xamarin Forms. So it's quite an amazing accomplishment for a component. But components aren't all UI-based components. We have things like modern HTTP client. Paul Betts put this one together. It's really an interesting example. This allows us to use the C# HTTP client libraries, that's a mouthful, those APIs that Microsoft has built, but actually have all of those calls, all of the networking transports go down over the native platform stack. So in the case of Android, we're using, the library's using Square's OK HTTP library. In the case of iOS, just using the native NSURLs, NSURL APIs. So that one's really interesting. You get really a lot out of this component for like, not even a full line of code. And then we have components like Azure Mobile Services. They offer a cloud service. They offer social authentication, data storage, push notifications. And the component they ship allows you to very easily connect to this cloud service, do things like log in. They even present the UI for you to log in. And as well as data storage, you can do link querying on the data tables. So this is a good example of like a cloud provider that ships components to our store. And we have many more than just the Azure ones that do similar things. Couchbase Lite, hopefully you visited their booth. They have a really interesting product. It's a NoSQL, like a document database. But the really interesting thing about them is that they allow you to do this offline mode where you can sync stuff when you finally come online, and their syncing engine is just phenomenal. The other type of giant that we have in our store, and there's a fair number of them, are what we like to call bindings. So if you're not familiar with this concept of bindings, they're basically a way for you to access native libraries, but in C# code. So if you take, for instance, the Google Cardboard component, it's actually a binding to the Java library that Google has released. So you can go grab that from the store and actually make Google Cardboard apps using the same APIs that you would get access to on Java, but doing it from Xamarin. Facebook's the same. We have both Android and iOS native SDKs bound for Facebook as a component. And of course, Amazon's Fire Phone, you can do all the cool dynamic perspective controls. You can ship a Xamarin app using that component, which is bindings into their APIs. So that's a lot about the different types of giants that we have. I want to actually dive in and take you through a demo of standing on those giants' shoulders and show you how to actually implement some of these. So you're gonna have to bear with me. We're gonna visualize this concept in life that after I'm done doing all the fun things I can do at Xamarin, what I really want to do in life is open this brick and mortar store that sells nothing but plush monkeys. Because that is the dream, obviously. So I'm gonna jump out of my presentation here. Just turn off some mirroring. And because I'm a geek and I'm a Xamarin monkey, when I go and open this brick and mortar store, I want to make a nice little app that my employees can use to check out orders and find the different products that we use. So the flow is going to be something like we can search for different products. We can let's scan some barcodes of those products because that's probably a better way to do it. Then we'll capture the credit card information. We'll capture their signature just for an extra layer of security, their address information, and finally we'll save all that information up to our cloud so that the order can be processed at the warehouse. So I've got a project open here, and it's going to be a little bit tough to see like that. I've got a project open here. It's pretty much just a stock Android app. There's nothing really much going on special here out of the box. I've got a few enhancements that I'll just quickly take you through in a second. So I've made a couple files already to get things going. I've got a models folder here. Just zoom in a bit. And in this models folder, I've got two things. I've got an item model. So just holding the barcode, price, image URL of the item that we're going to look at, and the title. So I'm going to actually use Azure Mobile Services as a backend in this demo. And that's the type of object that will be returned from my search query to look up all the different products that we carry in the store. I've got an order item here. And this one's a little bit more sophisticated. It's basically got all of the item information. So we're only going to ever process one monkey per order because nobody needs more than one monkey. And I've got some more data here, the signature points. So we're going to store some information about the customer's signature, their ship to address. Just scroll down out here a bit. And then I've got this Stripe token ID. So we're also going to be using Stripe as a back-end payment provider. And Stripe gives you this really cool ability to generate a token once you pass them some credit card information so that you don't have to store the credit card information on your server. You can use the token then to process payments against because we don't want to turn into another Home Depot situation here. So those are some pretty simple data models. I've got an API class that's going to hold some just common functions. Right now, it's just going to store a static instance of the current order we're working on. And then I've got this service tokens class here, which is just some keys for the various services we'll be using. Now, I've tabbed those out of the way there, so hopefully I don't mess up and show them to you and have to change them after. So let's get started. We're just a basic Android project here. I've got a main activity. The only things I've done to this are added some helpful reminders for myself and added this onActivity result override that we'll be using shortly. But before we can do anything in code, we should probably define a nice layout. So I've got nothing really special here. I'm actually going to paste in code, and I'm going to do this in a lot of places so that we can actually build this app from start to finish really quick. So I'm not going to go over the mechanics of the Android-specific things too much, but I've got this layout here, and it'll be easier to see as in the designer. And I did define a theme, so let's flip over to our app theme in the designer. And you can see here I've got a text box, I've got a search button, I've got a scan button, and then my list view to return all the monkeys that we're looking for. Nothing too dramatic. The next thing that I need to do is actually create some local references for those variables. So I've got my button here, my list view, my edit text. I've also got this items adapter. So if you're not familiar with Android, again, I'm not going into too much detail, but a list view needs an adapter to provide items and layout for those items for what it should show. So in my onCreate, I need to wire up those UI elements that I just made, so I'll paste some of that code in. You can see here I'm just wiring up the buttons, the list view and everything, creating a new instance of the items adapter, and then I'm wiring up the button click event handlers and the list view click event handler. So we're going to work with that. Basically, when we click search, we need to search. But let's go over into this items adapter. I've got a little bit started already. I'm just implementing the base adapter class for the type item. Remember that type item is what we're returning from the web service. So I've got this class set up. I need to now actually return something in the get view. So this is going to be the view representation of each item that the view displays. So to do that, the easiest way for me right now is to make a new layout file to define the actual layout. So let's do that. Just call it list item. And you can see here in my designer, nothing special, but if I paste some, just gotta find my actual list item layout. Again, I'll switch back over, and it's nothing special. I've just got an image for the actual item that's being returned, the title, the barcode, the price. So I'll save that layout, and now we need to actually create that layout, inflate that layout, and use it and assign all of our items. So I'm just going to paste some code in here that does that. Oop, wrong one. So I've got some code here that, first of all, checks to see if that layout can be recycled. It's a whole list view performance thing. If not, I'm just inflating the layout that we just made, going through assigning the various view items to their values from the current item that we're on. And then finally, I've got this image view. Now, who's done Android development and dealt with images? Anybody really yet? Few people. Okay, well, on Android, getting images from a URL is actually not the smallest feat. And doing so asynchronously is a little bit more tricky, even. So what I want to do here, I don't want to block the whole UI while I'm showing images and downloading them for every item. So let's pull in this first component that we're going to use, which is called URL ImageView Helper. That's going to help us actually go asynchronously download the images from a URL, assign them to the image view, and then cache them locally when we're done, so that if we ever need to get that image again, it already exists probably in our local cache, and we're not going out to the network again. So I'll go into the Components tab here, and if you didn't see that, if you haven't gone into Components before, we have this lovely little project item in all of our projects. So you can just double-click on that, and that'll bring you up to a page here with, first of all, some components that are installed locally, but then we've also got this option to go get more components. And this is actually taking us out to our Component Store. Network, let's go. So the Component Store, if you go to components.xamarin.com, you're going to get the exact same view as here. And basically, you can search through it either by keyword or by category. And maybe at the end, I'll try and load up a page. This doesn't appear to want to work right now. But I do have all the components that we're going to use installed locally already, so we can just grab them from there. So the first thing that I will add is this URL ImageView Helper. And now when I add it to my project, this is going to be exactly the same as if I had just grabbed it from the store. The first thing that you see pop open is this Getting Started guide. So if you remember, I talked a lot about this being part of our developer experience. The Getting Started guide is just meant to show us a really quick way how to use the component. And in the case of this component, it's actually really quite simple to use it. I'm just going to grab even the first line of code here. I'm going to close up the Getting Started guide and this components window. We'll come back to that in a bit. But I'm just going to paste in that code we just grabbed. And you can see here we're just calling into this URL ImageView Helper class and saying, hey, set the URL drawable, which set the image, on this particular image view and give it a URL to pull from. So in this case, it'll be my item's image URL. And that's all we had to do there. That's going to go grab the image, cache it, display it, do everything for us. We don't have to worry about what if we're running on the UI thread or not, or any of those issues. So I've got that all set up, but I have this empty list of items. We haven't done anything yet. We haven't gone and fetched any items from the cloud yet. So let's add a search method here. Very simple. We're going to do async await because that's the right way to go. I have to create this method in my API yet. I haven't done so yet. But when I do get it back, I'll get a list of items. I'll clear the local list I have, and then finally notify the data set, the items adapter, that it's changed and the list view should update. So let's now go and actually create the method that doesn't exist yet in the API. And I mentioned I'm going to use Azure Mobile Services. So let's go grab that component right away. Again, I've got it installed locally, but you can grab it from the store. Add it to my project. Again, the Getting Started tab pops up. The other thing that I didn't show you when you're looking at a component is you can go to the Samples tab here and open up a sample to see exactly how it's being used. So it's right there, easily accessible. You've also got access to see what actual packages the component's installing to and what NuGet dependencies it has. So I've added that component. And we're going to actually use that one more a little bit later, but for this particular call, it's such a simple call that, let's try using the HTTP client, because that's a really nice C# feature. So I've got that set up already. I'm just creating a new instance of it. I'm going to get a URL from the web server. In this case, it's pretty straightforward, passing my query in. So the query is going to be whatever we type into the text box. And I'll get back this JSON string that now that I have the Azure Mobile Services component installed, you can see that it installed this newtonsoft.json assembly for me. So I can then use that to deserialize my list of items from the JSON. So that's our search method. It's been wired up in the items adapter, but we still haven't wired up the search call from the items adapter itself. So let's go back to our main activity quick. And in our search button click is where we want to do this. just one line of code, pretty simple. We're just going to grab the text from the text box in the UI and do an await on the adapter.search. Now I mentioned we don't want to just search by text, we want to do barcode scanning as well. So that's really easy, right? Wouldn't take too long to write. We'll just add in this component, and I have to, just full disclaimer, I'm a little impartial to this one because this is one of my babies, but you can just copy some of the really simple, getting started code. We'll paste that right into our main activity here. And you can see right away that I've got this comment note that saying we have to pass a context into Android. And if you haven't done any Android development, you'll be familiar with context as soon as you are. Luckily, the activity that we're in, so this, is actually a form of context that we can pass into it. So we create our barcode scanner, we're awaiting the scan method, and then when we're done, instead of writing to the console the results, that doesn't really help, let's do, first of all, let's do the edit text search. Let's set its text to be the result, so the barcode scan result. The text property is actually going to be the barcode that was scanned. And then we can do our await adapter.search, edit text search.text. And that's going to do the same kind of search that we did with the typing it into the text box, but now it's using the barcode. So that's all we had to do for barcode scanning, no big deal. The next thing that we want to do is, you can see here that these are all await methods, right? So we're using async await quite a bit. That's great because we're not blocking the UI from the user, but we're calling out to the network, and I have a feeling my 3G might take a little bit longer than I was hoping. I want to make sure the user knows we're doing something. So one of the really easy to use, just quick components is, on Android, there's one called AndHUD, and on iOS there's one called BT Progress HUD. And they're really not that complex of components, maybe a couple hundred lines of code each, but it's something that I know I personally use in every one of the apps pretty much that I make. It's just a simple way to add a little indicator to the user that something's happening. So again, you can see here my getting started guide comes through again. I'll just copy and paste the easiest example of using it. And we'll put a call here to show this activity. Well, first of all, I need to import my using statement. Then I need to pass it this context again. Remember, context is an Android thing. We'll give it a better message. We'll say, hey, we're searching. And I could choose this mask type, but I'm going to just get rid of it and use the default one. So that's going to show a nice little pop-up before we search. When the search is done, I want to actually go in and take that pop-up away. So let's say dismiss. And with those 2 lines of code, we've done this whole nice little user interaction showing them what's going on. Now we should probably do the same thing here. And so I'll copy and paste this again, so that when we scan a barcode, it's going to do that as well. Okay, I'm actually going to do our first run of this app, because I think we're at a point, fingers crossed it's going to build, that we can start to see some results of what we've been doing. Now while this builds, I'm going to talk about the next step that we're going to do. Next, after we've actually captured the item that we want to order, we need to go and get the credit card information from our customer. So we're going to use this really cool component called card.io, which is kind of like a barcode scanner, but it takes a picture of a credit card and it automatically recognizes the credit card numbers in that picture. So it's just a really quick way to input the information. So our app has launched here. Let's pull up my screen. And you can see, pretty basic, but it looks like what we were expecting. Now if I just do a simple search, you can see our nice little progress head popping up, showing the user that something's happening. And we should very, hopefully shortly, get all of our search results coming back. Now I didn't enter any text, so we're going to get all of the items in our product inventory. So here we go, got all of our items. And it was pretty quick to load the images, but they all loaded asynchronously. We didn't block the UI while we were doing it, and now we have this nice little list of monkeys. But that wasn't quite good enough. Well, first of all, let's search for a specific monkey. So let's search for the anime monkey, even though it's in there. I just want to make sure that my actual search works. Okay, we're good, we're good. The next thing that I want to do is actually scan a barcode. So I luckily have the barcode of the monkey I'm trying to sell here in front of me. So I'm going to pop up the scanner by just hitting the scan button. And if you remember, this was like 2 lines of code to do. It's pretty straightforward. We have a kind of nice default UI. We can just go ahead and scan in our monkey barcode. You can see it popped up into the text box there, and we've got the monkey that we want to purchase. I don't know why I'm buying in pounds. Apparently my shop is a British shop, but that's okay. I've been hanging around too many British people this week, I think. So we're doing pretty good so far. We have a couple steps left to add. I mentioned this card.io component, so let's go grab that one right away. Add it to my project. And now in this case, and something to watch out for in a lot of the components, especially some of the Android ones, they often require some additional setup in your application. So you can see here, it's telling us we need to add some certain XML elements to our Android manifest file. And so that's something to be aware of. I've already done this particular case. We also need to add certain permissions. So we need to say, hey, we need to access the internet, we need the camera, because Android doesn't give you those things by default without asking for permission. And then we need to declare some of the features that we're using. And then finally, we can use the card.io activity, use their library. So just watch out when you're going through getting started guides that you're really careful to see what, especially on Android, things are required for you to do in configuration. So I'm going to go back to my main activity here. And so when we click a monkey from the list, we want to actually start the process of purchasing that monkey. So let's just paste some of that code in. So what I've got happening here, first of all, I need to resolve my using statement so my types all resolve correctly. So I'm getting the item at the given position that we clicked. I am then assigning a new order. Remember that static instance of the order we were tracking? Just an easy way to do it. Then I'm creating this new intent to start the card.io activity, and that was from our Getting Started guide. I pass in some particular information. I want to require the user to input an expiry date and CVC number on their credit card. And then finally, we do this start activity for result using this particular request code. I like to do all my request codes when I'm doing this in the 100s. You just pick a code. The important thing is that you know what code it is that you're picking. So what's going to happen now is we're actually going to fire up the activity that's inside of the card.io component. And when we're done working with that, when card.io component decides that we're going to return, it's going to come back to our main activity here and then call our onActivity result method. Now we can get multiple activity results from different requests, so we do need to check that we actually are looking for the right request code. So remember, we used 101 as a request code. So when this gets called back, when we're done getting the credit card information, we're just going to go ahead and get some extra information from the activity that was returned, from the intent data in this call. We're going to cast it to a Java cast to a card.io credit card type. So that's going to give us our credit card number, expiry date, all that information. Perfect. Now remember I said we're going to use Stripe to actually do the payment processing. So the next thing we need to do once we've got the credit card info is actually tell Stripe what that is so that they can give us a token back and we can then carry on with our process. So let's paste some code in for that. So I've got this Stripe card. Actually, it would help if I added the component first, probably. So I've got this Stripe component already added in. This is a pretty lengthy getting started guide for a component. Just quick note, one of the cool things, we actually support Apple Pay already in this component if you're doing iOS development. But I've got some code already made to get us through that. So all I'm doing here is basically mapping credit card types between the libraries because card.io doesn't know about Stripe and vice versa. Once I've got my Stripe credit card information, I can do a nice asynchronous call to this create token method. Pass in my credit card, pass in my private API key, and Stripe will give us back a token. Again, one line of code with their component, really simple to do. Don't have to wrap their own web service. Once I've got their token ID, I'm going to persist that to the current order static instance we're working on. And finally, we need to actually next go get the signature and ship to address and everything from the user before we send it all back up to the cloud. So to do all that, first of all, I need to actually have an activity to start. And to have an activity to start, I'll probably want an associated layout. So let's make the layout. I'm just going to call it signature layout. And again, just paste in my layout code. It'll make more sense when we actually look at the content view of it. So I've got a text box here that the user can enter their information into, where to ship to. I've got this signature pad view. Well, we haven't added the component yet. And then I've got this complete order button. So if we look at the source, this is kind of neat. This is a component I'll add in a second. It's actually completely written in C#. It's an open source component now that we offer at Xamarin. And it allows the users to draw their signature on a view. And we can declare that and use it right in the XML layout file. So let's, yeah, I do want to save that. Let's add our signature pad component. And they give us another alternative option of how to create the component. We have already done that in our layout code, so we're good to go. Now we need to actually make the activity that consumes that layout. Let's just quickly add an activity. And again, 17, copy some code in. This is a really simple activity. We've just got some instance variables to store our wiring up to the UI. We're actually wiring those variables up here. Finally, we've got remember that complete order button, the done button at the bottom. When we click that, we probably should do more error checking, but we'll trust our checkout people. At that point, I take the ship to information from the text box. I'm going to put that in this intent that's going to be returned back to that onActivity result call. And then I've got the signature. Now, the signature pad has a few different ways you can work with it, but one of the nice things is you can get an array of points that describes the path of the signature that was drawn. So I'm going to be really cheap and simple and just serialize that array, store that in the cloud, and we can deal with that later if we need to. So when everything's all said and done, I can just set my result with the intent I created and finish the activity. And at that point, it's going to go back to our main activity, to that onActivity result, and we can use the data that was passed back into it. Let's go back to our main activity. And the first thing that I need to do here, so when we're done getting the credit card information, we actually have to start this signature activity, right? So let's do start activity for result. I'm going to use IntelliSense here. And we're going to start the activity, which is the type of signature activity we just made. And we want to pass in a different request code from earlier because we don't want to mix the two up. So once we've done that, we can go ahead and write some code to get the result back. So I've pasted in another line of code here just to look over it again. So up here we had the request code 101, which was the card.io stuff. We're then saying otherwise, if it's request code 102, this must be returning from the signature activity. And what we're doing here is grabbing some of that extra information that was returned, putting it in the current order that we want to save to the cloud, and we're showing a nice little UI as well at the same time. Now I've got some exception handling here where we could show a toast if it failed. And then finally, we're going to dismiss the dialog that we were showing. But if it did succeed, I want to show this other little feature of this AndHUD component where it's going to show a nice little check mark to say, hey, it worked. Pretty simple, but adds a little bit of extra flair to your app. So the last thing that we have to do here is actually save our orders to the cloud. So first I'm going to need to go into our API class here, and I need to actually make a method to do that work. So let's just paste in some code here. So remember earlier we used Azure Mobile Services, but we didn't actually use their component to do anything. Well, I wanted to show you both ways, and this is using their actual mobile service client. So when we have an instance of this client, we just have to pass it the URL to our mobile service and our application key. When we get the client made, we can go get a table for any kind of C# object. So in this case, remember that order object we looked at the very beginning? We're going to get a table mapping for that. And with that table mapping, we can do things like insert async, we can delete async, we can update async, we can also even do link queries on that table using a where method. In this case, all we want to do is save it to the database and we're done. At that point, our back-end systems can handle the processing. So a pretty simple call, again, bypassing having to do all those HTTP requests ourselves by using Azure's component. So last but not least, we need to actually call that method from here. So let's do an await API.saveOrder, and we'll pass it the API.currentOrder that we've been working on all this time. So I think we should be good to go now. We've built the rest of our code. We're going to now explore what that actually looks like in practice going from start to finish to complete the order. So we'll wait for that to build again. I'm going to bring my screen up to the front here so that we can see what's going on when it comes up. And we're just about ready here to go. Okay, so our app is launching. Again, we've got the search text box. I'm going to just do that scan again just to see that one more time. So scan our barcode in. It's going to go grab that monkey for us. We're going to, pay in pounds, of course, for a monkey. So when I click this monkey now, it's going to take us to that card I/O activity. So you can see here it's another scanner view, and they've got this nice little interface that shows you where to hold the credit card. And the alternative way to enter is to actually use the keyboard. So we could do this instead. We could enter it manually. And this is all within the card.io component. I mean, if you remember, I didn't actually make any of this UI, right? But that would be no fun. And I just got this new credit card that I really want to test out. I hear it has no limit. So you can see here that it grabbed the number perfectly fine, 4240. So please don't write that number down. Bill will be unhappy. So we've got this credit card information here, and all we need to do now is type in the expiry date. So, you know, let's say it expires 12/16, and the CVC number is, 123, that's handy. So when we hit done, we're going to call back into our main activity. You can see we've got the nice little UI saying we're doing something, and that went out to talk to Stripe, got that token back, saved it to our local instance variable for the time being, and then called out to this signature activity where we need to capture the ship to information. So I'm just going to say it's going to Canada. That's specific enough, right? And finally, I can draw a signature. So I should have drawn a Xamarin or something. There. Perfect. And when I hit complete order, again, we're going back to the main activity, and now it's going up to the Azure cloud and saving all of that data. And as soon as it's saved, we'll give it a couple seconds, we should see a nice little checkbox. There you go, order completed. So success. We now can run a successful brick and mortar monkey store. I really think it's going to take off. I'll be opening soon, I promise. So that didn't take too long. I think we're hopefully around the 20-minute mark or 25-minute mark of actually making that app. And we used like 8 different components. And I counted beforehand, we're using about 300 lines of meaningful code. So you can see quickly how easy it is to piece different building blocks together to make a pretty awesome app. And I'd just like to leave some parting advice that, if you don't know about the components, if you don't know about these giants, go find one to use because your apps are going to benefit from it. But also, if you make something really cool, and if you listen to John Skeet's talk this morning, I follow the same advice. Make your own component and be a giant for someone else to stand on. So thanks for coming out. Yeah, questions? Yeah.
How does that work with the Xamarin Forms? I noticed you did all that in the native stuff, but if you were looking to sort of leverage the Forms architecture, what are your options there? I don't see any app components on the Forms.
So the question was, how do a lot of these components work with the Xamarin Forms, and how do you leverage those in your Xamarin Forms project? Well, you're starting to see some vendors come out with Xamarin Forms specific components, like that Sync Fusion one I showed. If the component isn't designed specifically for it, there's nothing stopping you from going and implementing like a service on that platform to do the code for the platform specific part of it, and then being able to access that from your shared code. And there's also actually a lot of third-party sort of source code libraries where people have done things. Like I've already seen the zebra crossing component wrapped up as a Xamarin Forms control. So people are already starting to make some of those additions to components where they exist.
And do you have like a components section there in the actual Forms solution type? You could add media packages, but it's not showing.
So the question is if we were going to add a component section to those Xamarin Forms projects. So you're talking about the shared projects, I'm guessing. We're still working on the best strategy for how to handle that right now.
The short answer is you can add it to the iOS and the Android portion of Forms, and then you can reference it, so just browse through it. It's always relative to your solution.
So to recap just quick, short answer is you can actually add manually references from the component that are downloaded to those shared projects when you need to. And we're working on a more delightful way to do that going forward. Any other questions in the back?
Real quick, I'm looking at this a little bit. What's the best practice for updates? Like,
So the question is, what's the best practice for updates with components? And right now, you've got to be aware of the updates that are existing out there. We don't try and push updates on you to try and avoid breaking things and everything. So right now, if there is an update, you can go ahead and check the component store to see if there is one. Yeah, question up front here.
Is there a way to create a session for enterprise, like if I create a component for Wrapup?
So the question is creating like your own component server for enterprise, or?
Is there a way that, let's say I create 10 components that is work-related stuff?
So we don't offer like a private way of hosting those components right now. You could make the component package yourself and use our tools to install the component package manually. So you could do it that way. A lot of, I mentioned the NuGet dependencies, so you could make a component that has several NuGet dependencies if you wanted to and install that. There's a command line tool, and you can ask me afterwards for more information about it, that you can use to manually install a component that exists on your local machine. Yep.
What did you say was the name of the iOS component that's like AndHUD?
The iOS component that's like AndHUD is called BT Progress HUD.
BT Progress?
Yeah, like, here, let's fire up the component store. What could go wrong with that? Like letter B, letter T. Here, let me do it in a text pad here. There you go. Any other questions? Dave.
With the components, do you find that people give you options to modify them to fit with branding, especially or something like multilingual and things like that? Is that sort of stuff coming up?
So the question being, do some of the components allow for more like modifying for your own branding and multilingual support? It really depends on a component-to-component basis. Like one of the things I've tried to do with the barcode scanner is allow you to add your own overlay view to the component. So something like card.io seems to be a little bit less customizable in that sense. It's really up to the individual component vendor. We're seeing a mix of both, I think. Anybody else? Cool, great. Thanks for coming out. Appreciate it.